Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our California Legislative Update webinar. We're excited to share with you some of the latest news from Sacramento and beyond in terms of different legislation working its way through the process. Your presenters today are Tom Adams, Director of Sales Tax Audit, Amy O'Gorman Jenkins, President and Founder of Precision Advocacy, and Nicole Wertelman, the Legislative Advocate, also with Precision Advocacy. In terms of many of you are familiar with our company, we have over 40 years of experience working throughout California as well as throughout the nation. Have a team of analysts, auditors, attorneys, and others that work hard to protect your revenue sources in your communities. Have over 4,500 state and local customers throughout the country, over 850 employees that serve the United States, and we've recovered over $300 million in revenues for our clients here in California. We are the leading provider of integrated revenue administration services and revenue enhancement, recovery solutions, and software and government technology for local governments throughout the United States. In terms of our agenda for today, we're looking at first some utility user tax legislation. Then we're going to explore TOT legislation, sales tax legislation, some cannabis legislation, economic development related legislation, talk about bonds a little bit. We're going to give you a brief update on the state budget. We're also going to have a few comments on some potential coming attractions we might be seeing down the road. Amy and Nicole, do you guys want to go ahead and get started on providing some updates on the various taxes?
Sure, happy to, Tom. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience members for participating today. So I will cover the first slide, and that relates to a bill that is being sponsored by Avenue, AB 330 by Assemblymember Chris Rogers. He's based actually in the Sonoma County area, covers Sonoma County all the way up to the Oregon border. This bill would extend the sunset date of the Local Prepaid Mobile Telephony Services Collection Act from January 1, 2026 to January 1, 2031. In essence, this bill ensures continued collection of local surcharges, including utility user taxes on retail sales of prepaid wireless services, which are then distributed to various local governments. This authorization was originally enacted in 2014 through a bill, AB 1717, which created a uniform statewide system for collecting these fees on prepaid wireless. It has been extended in legislation 2 subsequent times, and this bill would extend it for an additional 5 years. Now, what you're probably all asking is, why do we have to keep extending this? And that is based on a rule in the Assembly Revenue and Taxation Committee that says all tax levies need to be evaluated every 5 years. There's some iterations to that if you're dealing with veterans and certain constituency groups, but by and large, a 5-year extension on tax levies is what is required of that committee. So it is being reevaluated currently in legislation. More than 100 cities and counties rely on this collection to generate revenue that supports emergency response systems, basic local infrastructure, et cetera. And while it is a declining revenue source, it is still expected to generate about $2 million beginning in 2026. This bill is supported by the League of California Cities and numerous individual cities. Thank you to those who have sent letters of support. And it has no opposition. So pleased to be moving that bill through the process on behalf of Avenue and local governments that benefit from this surcharge.
Great. Next up, we have TOT legislation.
Moving to legislation, we have SB 346, which has been a long time in the coming. SB 346 is authored by Senator Maria Elena Durazo, and it would authorize a city or county to enact ordinances requiring short-term rental facilitators, so Airbnb, HomeAway, Expedia, and others, to provide addresses and other specified information about listed rental properties within the local agency's jurisdiction. And this measure was introduced in order to facilitate the collection and enforcement of TOTs. The measure will permit a local agency to fine the short-term rental facilitators for failing to provide requested information, as well as allows an ordinance to conduct an audit or examine the records of the short-term rental facilitator. SB 346 is sponsored by the League of California Cities as well as Imperial County. It has been supported by a large number of local jurisdictions. However, it has not been without controversy. It is pretty highly opposed by short-term rental facilitators, including Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia, TechNet, and the Travel Technology Association. It is currently awaiting a full vote of the Senate. Will need to be concurred in the Assembly, and then we'll move on to the governor. Moving along to sales and use tax legislation. AB 761 is sponsored by the Monterey Salinas Transit District and authored by Assemblymember Don Addis. And what the district is seeking to do is extend and expand its tax to fund transportation programs. And they also are looking at revising the process for imposing the tax. AB 761 would authorize the district to impose a TUT at a rate of no more than 0.25%. That would, in combination with the other TUTs, exceed the statutory combined rate limit of 2%. The measure is opposed by the California Taxpayers and Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Associations, and they are arguing that the sales and use tax is a regressive tax. And within the past 4 years, the legislature has authorized quite a number of them, 12 different local jurisdictions, which would allow the exceeding of the 2% statutory tax. The associations also oppose SB 333 for the same reason. And AB 761 needs to be voted upon by the full Senate and will then go to the governor. SB 63 by Scott Wiener gives Bay Area voters an opportunity on the November 2026 general election ballot to allow transportation services, BART, Caltrain, Muni, AC Transit, a sustainable funding source. And the measure would be to approve a 10 to 15-year regional sales tax measure. It would also require increased accountability on the part of the transit agencies. That measure was introduced in large part because of the funding crisis that transit agencies are in, which has been exacerbated, of course, by the ridership decrease during the COVID-19 pandemic. SB 63 is awaiting hearing in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Moving to SB 86, which is sponsored by State Treasurer Fiona Ma and authored by Senator Jerry McNerney. It extends and expands the California Alternative Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority Act sales and use tax exclusion, as well as adds fusion energy as an eligible alternative energy source. The exclusion has essentially over the last several years created 136,000 jobs and over 354 manufacturers in 39 counties have been approved under the program. SB 333 by Senator John Laird allows the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, SLOCOGS, to impose a TUT at a rate of no more than 1% that would exceed the 2% cap established by law. They're looking to ensure that SLOCOG, the county, and all 7 cities within the COG would be able to engage in a public process to develop an expenditure plan for voters' consideration. The funding would provide resources to improve transportation infrastructure, including safety and mobility needs. In order to take advantage of SB 333, SLOCOG would have to adopt an ordinance proposing the TUT. The electorate must approve it between January 1, 2026 and January 1, 2032. That one is awaiting a full vote of the Assembly. And handing it over to Amy to discuss key cannabis legislation.
Okay, well, unlike prior years, there are not as many cannabis bills. We've averaged in the past anywhere between 40 and 60 bills. It's a little slower this year in terms of cannabis legislation. But there are some pretty critical bills that local governments are, in fact, weighing in on. Probably the biggest ticket item is AB 564 by Assemblymember Matt Haney out of San Francisco. For those of you that have authorized commercial cannabis in your jurisdictions, the industry experienced a approximately 25% tax increase, and that's the state excise tax. It jumped from 15% to 19%. This was effective July 1, so just a few short weeks ago, and we're already seeing some impacts in the field. What this bill would do is it would revert the tax back to 15%, which is how it has been since the measure Prop 64 was enacted in November of 2016. And so it would go back to 15% beginning October 1 of this year, which is the start of the fourth quarter. Really, the goal here is to stabilize the legal cannabis market and reduce consumer costs, making operators more competitive against an illicit market, which the state has indicated is roughly 60% of overall sales. So when you think 60% illicit market, 40% legal market, the industry is really pushing for, again, this reversion back to 15%. This bill faces a very uphill battle. It has numerous opponents, largely beneficiaries of the state excise tax revenue, and that's divided into 3 buckets. It goes to law enforcement, it goes to environmental organizations, and youth groups. So this bill did pass with bipartisan support out of the Assembly. It is pending in the Senate, where it is facing a little bit tougher climb, but it is the #1 priority for the industry, and it's also strongly supported by local government organizations, including League of California Cities, rural counties, as well as some individual cities and counties, largely because they are actually seeing the impacts of this tax hike on consumer sales, which also affects local revenue. So that is a big bill. The next one is also a very pressing priority for the legal industry and for some jurisdictions. This one is AB 8 by Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguirre-Curry. She's also the Assembly Majority Leader. This has been a huge priority for her for a number of years, but this really tries to get at the very rapid increase and proliferation of the sale of products that are deemed hemp but contain very intoxicating levels of THC. What we're finding is there's been an uptick in the production of these products and very creative ways by chemists and others to synthetically manufacture THC, but because hemp is technically legal at the federal level, they're using this loophole to sell these products into California. And again, they're highly intoxicating. So this is in direct competition with legal cannabis. So again, for local jurisdictions that authorize legal commercial cannabis in your communities, this has had a very significant, the sale of intoxicating hemp products has had a very significant impact on the legal industry, and that affects local revenue. So what this bill does is it really strengthens a lot of the enforcement tools that the state has. It provides some additional enforcement tools at the local level, and it also shifts enforcement authority over these products from the Department of Public Health, which is not, I think most argue, not equipped to handle this proliferation of these products and didn't anticipate it. So it would shift authority to enforce and govern from Department of Public Health to the Department of Cannabis Control. Again, another very controversial measure, but one that has been prioritized by the governor and the administration. In fact, the administration is very involved in the drafting of this measure, and it is deemed a priority. One last thing I'll note on this bill is it codifies an existing ban on these products, which again are very readily available still. But it's important for jurisdictions to be aware, if you are seeing intoxicating products containing high levels of THC that are deemed hemp, they are already illegal in California, and this bill would codify existing emergency regs and statute. So a big bill for the industry. AB 141 actually was already signed by the governor. It was a trailer bill. This was aimed at addressing a $50 million structural deficit within the Department of Cannabis Control. Many argue that this deficit is largely the result of, again, a decline in the legal industry because of high taxes, because of the illicit market, because of hemp. And so what it did is it said we could take a portion of that excise tax revenue collected at the state level and use it to fund illicit market enforcement. And this has been an important concern for local jurisdictions. So right now, illicit market enforcement has, well, at least until July 1, was managed and funded through cannabis fees, legal cannabis industry fees. There's now going to be tax revenue dedicated for that purpose. It also makes some changes to a grant program administered by the Board of State Community Corrections that a lot of jurisdictions have applied for and benefit from. It is now saying that if you are applying for these funds, the BSCC must prioritize grant money going to enforcement efforts to combat illicit market activity. The next bill, AB 632 by Assemblymember Greg Hart. This one is sponsored by the Rural County Representatives of California. It empowers local governments to convert cannabis-related administrative fines into judgments. It allows liens on property connected to unlicensed activity and includes due process protections for property owners. This really is a product of some longstanding concerns that have been raised by local governments who seek to enforce against unlicensed activity. They go through the normal code enforcement process, but then it's kind of like a whack-a-mole. These folks leave and vacate. So this would allow for a more expedited enforcement process. And then the last bill I'll highlight relates to the online marketplaces, basically the online sale of illicit cannabis and hemp products. So SB 378 by Senator Scott Wiener would crack down on online sales of these products by requiring online platforms to verify seller licenses, display consumer warnings, and offer human-reviewed reporting reporting mechanisms. It also imposes strict liability and civil penalties for non-compliance. This bill is sponsored by the United Food and Commercial Workers, who organize and have employees, cannabis employees, that are directly being impacted by, again, this proliferation of illegal online sales. In terms of these bills, I didn't talk about status, but again, all are moving. I think the one that faces the most significant uphill battle is the first one, AB 564. But all these bills continue to move through the process and are enjoying bipartisan support, both Republicans and Democrats, as cannabis becomes increasingly more normalized in California. So next slide.
Okay, moving to economic development legislation, probably one of the most hotly contested bills of the year for local jurisdictions is AB 339, which is sponsored by labor unions. AB 339 is authored by Assemblymember Liz Ortega, and it would require public agencies to give recognized employee organizations no fewer than 60 days written notice before issuing a request for proposals, a request for quotes, for renewing or extending an existing contract to perform services that are within the scope of work of the job classifications represented by the recognized employee organization. It would require the notice to include specified information, including the anticipated duration of the contract, scope of work, anticipated cost, a copy of the solicitation itself or any information that would normally be included in the solicitation, as well as the reason the public agency believes that a contract is necessary. If the recognized employee organization demands to meet and confer after receiving the written notice, the public agency and employee organization shall, within a reasonable time, meet and confer in good faith relating to the public agency's proposed decision to enter into a contract. As mentioned previously, it is sponsored by Service Employees International Union, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, as well as the California Federation of Labor Unions. And the sponsors are citing several reasons for pursuit of the bill. This is very similar to one of Assemblymember Ortega's bills from last year. And labor unions are concerned that responses to RFPs and RFQs are not typically made public, and that when local governments contract out work of public employees, many unions are unaware of that contract until it is too late to meaningfully engage their existing bargaining rights. There are numerous opponents, including city and county associations, multitude of individual cities and counties, as well as numerous nonprofits and community-based organizations. And their concerns with the bill, as I would anticipate many of yours, are that the measure is impractical in its execution, unworkable for ensuring provision of public services, as well as it undermines local labor negotiations. It would impose significant costs based on the new notice requirements, extended labor negotiations, and likely delays in services and projects. It's important to note that AB 339 applies to any contract within the scope of work of any job classification represented by the recognized employee organization, which generally speaking means that pretty much every contract would be subject to notice as well as a possible meet and confer. The opponents of the bill are arguing that existing law already incorporates some common sense limitations upon the requirement to meet and confer, including where there's a long-standing past practice of contracting for particular services, as well as where contracting out is contemplated in the applicable MOU. Additionally, an administrative remedy is already available to employee organizations when they believe that locals have neglected to meet existing notification and meet and confer requirements, and that would be to file an unfair labor practice charge at the Public Employee Relations Board. And then finally, as written, there are many concerns that AB 339 could deter local agencies from working in partnership with local CBOs, such as nonprofits who provide critical local services, and that would add considerable uncertainty to the nonprofit sector's ongoing financial viability. The measure will be heard in the Senate Appropriations Committee on August 18th. All right, moving along to AB 417 by Assemblymember Juan Carrillo. In recent years, tax increment financing tools such as enhanced infrastructure financing districts and community revitalization and investment authorities have been increasingly important tools in funding local infrastructure projects. AB 417's goal is to improve their functionality by streamlining the administrative processes and providing other crucial clarifications to existing law while maintaining public participation and transparency. The reforms will improve the the ability of local governments to support economic development and build infrastructure in communities across the state. This measure is awaiting a vote of the full Senate and will then go directly to the governor. Looking at SB 782, this measure creates a subcategory of climate resilience districts to finance disaster recovery efforts. It is authored by Senator Sasha Renee Perez and is sponsored by LA County. So this measure really came out of the January 2025 fires. SB 782 would authorize the city or county to adopt a resolution providing for the division of taxes of any participating entity without following the procedures for the preparation and adoption of an infrastructure financing plan under Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District law under certain circumstances. The goal is to accelerate rebuilding through emergency procurement and expedited approvals, as well as to support housing, infrastructure, risk mitigation, and small business recovery. This measure is awaiting a full vote of the Senate. AB 265 establishes the Small Business and Nonprofit Recovery Fund Act. It creates a grant program to provide competitive grants to small businesses and nonprofit organizations directly impacted by a state of emergency. It is authored by Assemblymember Jessica Caloza and is sponsored by the California Small Business Development Centers. The goal of AB 265 is to create a more equitable and robust recovery framework for small businesses and nonprofit organizations impacted by wildfires. A prior version of the bill did include some funding. However, the current version of the bill would need to be funded through the annual budget process. This measure is also scheduled to be heard in the Senate Appropriations Committee on August 18th. Finally, SB 772, authored by Christopher Cabaldon, will reform the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program by expanding the definition of qualifying infill projects to include a residential or mixed-use residential project located within an urbanized area on a vacant site where at least 75% of the perimeter of the site adjoins parcels that have been previously developed with urban uses. It will allow local jurisdictions to apply for funding without having a developer as a co-applicant. The state has found that the infrastructure grant program is effective. However, it is oversubscribed and it funds upgrades to water, sewer, and transit access that make new housing possible. Senator Cabaldon's goal is to allow former commercial and underutilized areas that have the potential for housing development but lack public infrastructure to support higher density residential development. SB 772 is awaiting hearing in the Assembly Appropriations Committee.
Okay, so I'm going to cover housing bonds. So there's two housing bonds that have been introduced in the California State Legislature, AB 736 by Assemblymember Buffy Wicks and SB 417 by Senator Christopher Cabaldon. Both proposed $10 billion general obligation bonds that would be placed on the June 2026 primary election ballot. They differ very slightly in terms of their funding allocations, with one actually funding infill and the other not funding infill, but supporting wildfire prevention, displacement assistance, and recovery in wildfire impacted rental markets. Both have broad-based broad-based support and no opposition. So Housing California, YIMBY groups are primarily advocating for this. And again, as I said, no major organized opposition at this point. AB 736 has been approved unanimously by the Assembly and is currently pending in the Senate, whereas SB 417 has not moved. But again, because these are both housing bonds, they're not subject to the same deadlines that we see in traditional policy legislation. These would be measures that would be placed on the ballot, so they can be heard at any time. To qualify for the ballot, they do require 2/3 vote of the legislature, and then again would go to the June 2026 ballot, where it would just be a 50% plus one majority vote requirement. From the standpoint of the authors and members of the legislature, this is really a smart investment that I think many argue would leverage a 4-to-1 return from federal tax credits, local grants, and resident rent payments. The scale that California, at least as we understand it, is that there's we need about 2.5 million new housing units, including 1.2 for lower income households. There's a considerable production gap, as I think we all know, and a severe rent burden. So again, a lot of support from the legislature. I would also note that there was a prior bond in 2018. All that money has been fully allocated. So there is no additional money, bond money for housing production and development. And so, again, there's a real argument that a lack of affordable housing production could drop substantially after this year due to a lack of bond support. So these continue to move. I suspect they'll continue to go through additional iterations. And again, you've got one on the Assembly side, one on the Senate side, and more to come in terms of whether or not those will continue to move and be placed again on the ballot next year. I would note that we did receive some intelligence. There's a lot of polling being done throughout the state to kind of test voter support for additional bond funding. And so we'll see again what transpires as a result of some of that data collection, which will certainly drive and influence the decision making in the legislature. But again, both of these enjoy support. Next slide, please.
All righty. Taking a look at the state budget status for this year, the budget has primarily wrapped up. However, when the legislature returns from summer recess, we're hearing that the plan is to address the allocations of the climate bond. This year, as in several past years, the legislature sent their budget to Governor Newsom and then negotiated with his administration and sent some follow-up changes to the budget to him in order to have him sign everything at once. I think this year is particularly unusual in that there's been a lot of wait and see around federal activity. And now that H.R. 1 has been signed into law, the administration and legislature are taking a look at what impacts it will have on California.
Well, H.R. 1 is the big, beautiful bill, for those of you who don't know.
Yes. And so far, primarily they're looking at Health and Human Services impacts to Medicaid and CalFresh. The Assembly Budget Subcommittee on Accountability and Oversight will be having a hearing on August 20th to discuss potential impacts. However, generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that there is anticipated to be some large holes in the budget as a result of the changes. The administration and legislature will continue to look at those throughout the fall and winter. We've received quite a few questions about whether or not a special session will be happening. Right now, it doesn't look likely. Certainly, it doesn't look likely as it pertains to the budget. And so that could change. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you apprised on what's going on there.
And Nicole, remind me how much of our budget is, it depends on federal funding. It's pretty substantial.
It is. It's about a third.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Amy and Nicole, for the overview of various legislative bills going through the process. I wanted to shift gears just slightly for a minute. We've heard some questions from some of our clients in terms of kind of potential legislation or other items that are out there. So I wanted to give you a brief update on what's happening. First, in terms of the sales tax, there's been some questions as to whether the reform might be on the way at some point. In particular, there is a proposal put forward by the League of Cities City Managers Working Group. Had worked for quite some time to come up with a proposal that was, jointly put together by those jurisdictions that both have warehouse fulfillment center within their city or jurisdiction, and those that don't. There's been quite a lot of kind of back and forth over the years in terms of how sales tax from warehouse fulfillment center facilities should be allocated. The basics of the city managers working group proposal would be a 50-50 split between the warehouse fulfillment centers and the destination of where those goods are shipped. This will not impact existing tax sharing agreements, and it would have a 5-year phase-in period. There's various sort of further details. You can go to the League's website if you want a little bit more information. The latest on this was that it was heard by the Revenue and Taxation Committee in the spring of this year. No action was taken. The anticipation is that it will be heard again by the Revenue and Taxation Committee in January of this coming year. At that point, an action likely will be taken, whether to advance it or not, to the full board for action. Once it gets to the full board, the board will review it and take a vote on it. If it is adopted as Cal City's policy, the board would then choose whether to direct staff to work with the legislature to introduce a constitutional amendment bill, which basically would need to go through the process and then to the voters, or to collect signatures to qualify a measure kind of directly for the ballot. So this is still very much a work in progress. Still, we're at least a few years out, it looks like, until something might happen on it. But I know a lot of you have been asking about this, and it's still sort of in the discussion mode at this point. No sort of legislation on the table at this point. In terms of some other items that we've been talking to our clients about on the UUT side, was there a question there? On the UUT side, the video streaming and other sort of kind of what are called over-the-top applications had been a long-standing item, whether cities were sort of authorized to, cities, I should say, with modernized UUT ordinances were authorized to apply UUT to streaming platforms such as Netflix or Disney or Amazon Prime, that sort of thing. The city of Santa Barbara did decide to take on this issue and challenged Disney to pay their UUT. That has had a fair amount of success to date. The city won its case in their local city hearing. That then went on to the Superior Court. The city won again in a pretty resounding victory in terms of the judge's arguments in Superior Court. It is now in appeals court, and we anticipate we should be getting a decision on that kind of somewhere in the November to February timeframe. There is a possibility that it could then be appealed onto the Supreme Court, pardon me, and we'll just kind of wait to hear on that. So far, so good on that one. For those of you that have modernized UUT ordinances that allow most of those ordinances, so were done kind of in the, say, 2005 to 2015 sort of time frame. Many cities sort of updated their ordinances to include different new technologies such as video streaming. So stay tuned on that one. That is a very interesting one that will affect those of you with modernized UUT ordinances. The other thing on the UUT front is our team has been working with our attorneys to enforce the electric companies pay the gross usage from electricity generated by solar panels. Currently, they're just paying on the net amount. We do believe we're going to be having success on that. So companies like PG&E or SoCalEd, et cetera, will be increasing their UUT for electricity that are coming from solar panels. So again, stay tuned on that one, but we think we have several fairly significant victories coming on the UUT front down the road. That pretty much concludes most of what we wanted to talk about. We're going to take a few questions in just a minute. Just a few things about our company here. Again, we've partnered with many of cities and counties throughout the state and throughout the country. We're looking forward to continuing our partnerships with our local government partners going forward. Thank you for joining. We did have a few final questions that I've received prior to the webinar that I wanted to kind of open it up to the group to share. I know we just have a few minutes. In terms of the first one I'm looking at here says this is the first year of a 2-year legislative process in the Capitol. Any thoughts on potential legislation that might be delayed to or coming next year? Any thoughts on how the 2026 election will affect the legislative program priorities next year? Amy, Nicole, any thoughts on kind of 2026, what might be coming down the road?
Sure. I can start, and then Nicole can add. So first off, so as you noted, Tom, we're in the first year of a 2-year session. So we're in the 2025-26 legislative session. That gives time for, to that first part of your question, that gives time for legislators to really fine tune some of their more hefty policy bills. So if there's intense opposition or if there's items that need to be worked out, they can obviously make their bill in the first year of the 2-year session a 2-year bill, which allows additional time again for deliberation and amendments. So that is one thing that makes 2026 a little bit more interesting because we'll see a lot of those 2-year bills return. To the question about the 2026, that is an election year. That'll be a big election year. In terms of the composition of the legislature, I did a quick cursory review. It looks like we will have 11 assembly members that will be either termed out, and of those 11, I think 5 are just pursuing just new offices. So they're leaving their assembly seat early to pursue vacant Senate seats. On the Senate side, there's actually going to be 7 members that are termed out. And so, a lot of times what you'll see is members really trying to cement their legacy in their final 2 years, and largely in that final year. So I expect to see those termed out legislators really focusing on how they want to be remembered in the legislature. You also see in the second year of a 2-year session, which is also an election year, you will see situations where you'll see shifting in leadership. So right now, Senator Mike McGuire is our Senate President pro tem. He is terming out at the end of 2026 and running for the insurance commissioner. there has already been a leadership change announcement, though he remains pro tem through the end of the year. On the assembly side, James Gallagher, another assembly member who was the Republican minority leader, he's also termed out in 2026, and he just announced his successor. So you see a lot of that, those leadership changes occurring in the second year. So that's kind of a basic overview and answer to that question. I don't know, Nicole, if there's some pressing items that you've kind of identified in some of your work, but that's my answer.
No, and that was very thorough. The only thing I would add, which you mentioned earlier, is it's likely they'll delay action on the housing bond until next year, and then we'll get a broader picture of moving forward with budget activities both next year and as a result of the 2026 election.
Yeah.
Great.
So thanks, Tom. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, a couple more if you have time. Are there any key legislative proposals this year that you think it would be good to encourage our city to support or oppose? What is sort of the timing for action? I assume this would be a typical support oppose letter from the council, or are there any other actions we should be encouraging city council to take on any of the items, legislative items out there currently?
Well, I would just say we tried to kind of give you the highlights of some of the key items that we've been tracking as Avenue, but all of these items are also being tracked by the League of California Cities. So hopefully those flags that we, again, noted in this presentation will be items of interest to Avenue clients and participants on this webinar today. So if you haven't taken a position on anything we covered and that is of interest to your jurisdiction, I would strongly encourage you to do that now. From a timing standpoint, we are really approaching the tail end of the 2025 legislative year. We are in summer recess. The legislature adjourned on July 19th. Technically, they actually left the 18th. They come back August 18th. And at that point, we are past the policy committee process, and we're going to just jump right into the appropriations committee process. And then anything that gets out of the appropriations committees in both houses will go straight to the floor. So again, if you have not already weighed in on some of this critical legislation, really now's the time to do that because we are getting into the final days. And particularly if you have a very strong position and these bills are challenged. I know that the Durazo bill, the TOT bill, the Airbnb bill, for instance, the cannabis tax bill, those need things. So I would just say if again, you haven't weighed in, this is really the time to do it.
Great. Final question here. Again, if you're submitting questions during the webinar and we did not get to your question, we will be following up with you after the webinar is complete. So thank you for submitting any questions you would like over the chat feature. We will get to those. Apologies, we're a little time constrained today to get to everything. The final question I have here is often said that singles are a lot easier than home runs in the Capitol. However, there seems to be continuing issues at the state that are not being addressed, such as structural deficits at the state and local level. Cost of living, housing. It sounded like the affordable housing bond is, I guess, one of the things that may be addressing that. Are there any other larger structural fixes, kind of more home run type stuff that we don't usually see that are being discussed that we might be on the horizon or that we might see? I guess the sales tax reform, I guess, is potentially one of those. We had discussed sort of the status of that one. Anything else, Amy and Nicole, that you think might be sort of on the horizon that is sort of a kind of game changer or kind of a home run, if you will?
I think one thing we should look at actually from this year is the California Environmental Quality Act reforms.
Oh, yeah.
And how those are going to change things coming into the future. They were accomplished in an unusual way through the budget process rather than through the legislative policy process. But I would anticipate not only cleanup, but potential changes to those in the coming years. As Amy mentioned, they're maybe some major issues coming down based on the change in the Senate leadership. And then finally, another item that's been discussed for several years is making changes to the rainy day fund to allow for greater funds to be accumulated over time. And that one will have to go to the voters. And from everything we're hearing, that is likely to happen in the fall of 2026.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining us here this morning for our legislative webinar. We do appreciate our partnerships with our clients throughout the state and as well as through the rest of the country. We do encourage you to get involved in the legislative process. Amy and Nicole are working hard to on various bills that either we put forward or the league put forward, or working directly with other cities and other agencies, other clients they have. So thank you for joining us, and wishing you the best for the rest of the day and upcoming year. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.